The air crackled with tension. A young man's life hung in the balance. The courtroom was a stage where every glance, every whisper, and every breath seemed to carry the weight of the world. The stakes couldn't be higher. Juror #2 is a gripping courtroom drama that delves into the complexities of justice. It explores the moral and ethical dilemmas faced by ordinary people when they are called upon to make extraordinary decisions. The film doesn't just show us the courtroom, it immerses us in it. It plunges us into the claustrophobic world of a jury room. 12 strangers grapple with a life-or-death decision. Each juror brings their own biases, experiences, and emotions to the table, making the deliberation process a complex and often contentious affair. At the heart of the story is Juror #2, an ordinary man thrust into an extraordinary situation. He is initially convinced of the defendant's guilt. The evidence seems overwhelming. A young man stands accused of murdering his father. The courtroom is a battleground of emotions. The prosecution presents a damning case. The defense struggles to sow seeds of doubt. Juror #2 listens intently. He absorbs the testimonies, the evidence, the arguments. He watches the faces of the witnesses, the lawyers, and the defendant, trying to read between the lines to see beyond the surface. He believes he understands the truth. He is certain of the young man's guilt. But as the deliberations begin, a seed of doubt takes root in Juror #2's mind. He starts to question the seemingly airtight narrative. He can't shake off a nagging feeling that something isn't quite right. He becomes increasingly troubled by inconsistencies. The more he delves into the evidence, the more questions arise. What seemed clear-cut now appears murky and convoluted. His certainty wavers. The easy verdict he expected becomes a torturous journey into the heart of the case. He finds himself at odds with other jurors, some of whom are steadfast in their belief of the defendant's guilt. The pressure mounts as the hours turn into days, and the weight of the decision becomes almost unbearable. Juror #2 must navigate through a labyrinth of moral quandaries, personal biases, and the haunting question of what is truly just. The film masterfully captures the essence of human frailty and the quest for truth in the face of overwhelming odds. The weight of a life in his hands, a decision that could alter the course of someone's future forever, rests heavily on Juror #2's shoulders. Juror #2 finds himself increasingly alone in his doubts, isolated by his growing uncertainty. The other jurors are ready to convict, their minds seemingly made up. They see a clear-cut case of patricide, convinced by the prosecution's narrative. But Juror #2 is haunted by uncertainty, plagued by the nagging feeling that something isn't right. He feels the immense gravity of the situation, the life-altering consequences of their verdict. He begins to scrutinize the evidence with a new perspective, determined to uncover the truth. He dissects the testimonies, searching for inconsistencies, for any sign that might point to a different conclusion. He replays the events in his mind, looking for alternative explanations, questioning every detail. The more he delves, the more he questions, the more he realizes how much is at stake. The burden of proof weighs heavily on him, a constant reminder of the responsibility he bears. He understands the consequences of a wrong decision, the irreversible impact it could have. An innocent man might be condemned. The thought is unbearable. He must be sure, absolutely sure. He must be absolutely sure for the sake of justice, for the sake of his own conscience. His conscience becomes his guide, leading him through the labyrinth of doubt and uncertainty. He embarks on a solitary quest for truth, a journey that will test his resolve and his beliefs, a quest that will challenge his beliefs, his values, and his very understanding of justice, pushing him to his limits. He holds the fate of the young man in his hands, a responsibility that feels almost too great to bear. The weight of that responsibility is crushing, a constant pressure that he cannot escape. Yet he knows he must persevere for the sake of truth and justice. Juror #2's doubt begins to manifest as subtle questions. He starts to feel a gnawing uncertainty, a sense that something isn't quite right. This feeling grows stronger with each passing moment, compelling him to voice his concerns. He challenges the other jurors' assumptions, questioning the very foundation of their beliefs. His voice, though calm, carries the weight of his growing skepticism. He asks them to reconsider the evidence, to look beyond their initial impressions. He points out discrepancies in witness testimonies, highlighting the contradictions that others have overlooked. Each statement is scrutinized, each word dissected. He knows that the truth often lies in the details, in the small inconsistencies that others might dismiss. He highlights inconsistencies in the physical evidence, drawing attention to the anomalies that don't fit the prosecution's narrative. He examines the crime scene photos with a critical eye, noting the details that seem out of place. At first, his inquiries are met with resistance. The other jurors are set in their ways, convinced of the defendant's guilt. They shake their heads, crossing their arms in defiance, unwilling to entertain the possibility of doubt. The other jurors are irritated by his persistence. They exchange frustrated glances, their patience wearing thin. They see his questions as a hindrance, an obstacle to reaching a quick verdict. They dismiss his concerns as insignificant details, waving their hands dismissively and rolling their eyes. To them, these are just minor points that don't change the overall picture. They urge him to see the bigger picture, to focus on the overwhelming evidence that points to the defendant's guilt. They point to the timeline, the sequence of events that seems to confirm their beliefs. The young man is clearly guilty, they argue. They nod in agreement, convinced that the case is open and shut. The defendant's demeanor, his apparent confidence, only reinforces their conviction. Why waste time on trivial matters, they ask, looking at their watches and sighing in exasperation. They are eager to conclude the deliberations and move on with their lives, but Juror #2 refuses to be silenced. He stands firm, his expression one of determination. He speaks assertively, his voice unwavering. He knows that the pursuit of justice is never a waste of time. He persists in his pursuit of the truth, meticulously examining each piece of evidence. He writes detailed notes, his focus unbroken. He is driven by a need to uncover the reality of what happened. He meticulously examines each piece of evidence, using a magnifying glass to scrutinize the documents. He arranges the evidence carefully, looking for connections that others might have missed. He relentlessly questions every assumption, challenging the validity of each piece of evidence. He looks at his notes intensely, searching for the truth hidden within the lines. His doubts are not mere whims. They are deeply rooted in logic and reason, born from a careful analysis of the facts. He thinks deeply, his brow furrowed in concentration. They are deeply rooted in logic and reason. He makes logical points using hand gestures to emphasize his arguments. He discusses the evidence with reasoned arguments, hoping to persuade the other jurors. As he digs deeper, he uncovers cracks in the seemingly solid case. He discovers new evidence, finds errors in the documents that others have overlooked. Each discovery strengthens his resolve. The prosecution's narrative begins to crumble. He presents counter-arguments, showing the flaws in the prosecution's case. The other jurors begin to see the holes in the story they once believed. The truth, he realizes, is far more complex than it appears. He connects the pieces of evidence on a board, revealing a complex plot that challenges the initial assumptions. His pursuit of justice becomes a race against time. He looks at the clock anxiously, knowing that he must act quickly. He flips through the evidence, searching for the final piece that will complete the puzzle. He must convince the other jurors before it's too late. He speaks passionately, gesturing emphatically as he makes his case. He knows that the fate of an innocent man may rest in his hands. Section 4. A Tangled Web. The prosecution's case unravels. Juror #2's relentless questioning begins to unravel the prosecution's case. He meticulously exposes flaws in their arguments. He highlights inconsistencies in witness testimonies. He sheds light on alternative interpretations of the evidence. The courtroom becomes a battleground of wits. Juror #2's sharp mind dissects the prosecution's case piece by piece. He challenges their every assertion. He exposes their biases. He reveals the fragility of their arguments. The other jurors are forced to confront their own biases. They begin to question their initial certainty. The young man's guilt, once a foregone conclusion, becomes increasingly uncertain. As the prosecution's case weakens, the tension in the jury room mounts. The jurors grapple with their doubts. The atmosphere becomes electric with suspicion and uncertainty. The line between guilt and innocence blurs. Section 5. Seeds of Uncertainty. Juror #2's growing conviction. Fueled by his growing conviction, Juror #2 continues to challenge the other jurors. He presents his findings with unwavering determination. He lays out the inconsistencies, the contradictions, the alternative explanations. His passion is contagious. The other jurors start to listen. They begin to question their own assumptions. The seeds of doubt that Juror #2 planted begin to take root. He becomes the voice of reason in a room clouded by prejudice. He appeals to their sense of justice. He reminds them of the gravity of their decision. He implores them to look beyond the surface, to seek the truth that lies hidden beneath layers of assumption and bias. The jury room transforms into a crucible of conscience. The jurors are forced to confront their own prejudices, their own fears, their own doubts. The easy path of conviction gives way to a more arduous journey towards justice. Section 6. The pressure mounts confrontation in the jury room. As Juror #2's influence grows, so does the tension in the jury room. The other jurors, their beliefs challenged, become increasingly hostile. Tempers flare. Arguments erupt. The room becomes a pressure cooker of emotions. Juror #2 finds himself a lone wolf surrounded by a pack of doubters. He is accused of being naive, of being unrealistic, of being blinded by some misguided sense of idealism. But he stands firm, his resolve unshaken. He refuses to be intimidated. He knows in his heart that the young man deserves a fair trial, a fair chance. He will not be swayed by pressure, by anger, by the mob mentality that threatens to consume the room. The pressure cooker finally explodes, accusations fly, insults are hurled. The room descends into chaos. But amidst the turmoil, Juror #2 remains a beacon of calm, his voice a steady reminder of their shared responsibility to seek justice.